What up? What up? What up? What up? What up, y'all? We back for another episode of Amsterdam Talk, as usual, that I can only do at this point in time. I got my guests with me, Tia back again. Slippery When Wet is back in the building today. And today we want to talk about STIs versus STDs versus STIs. But before I get into it, we was actually in the lab today creating a new intro for the show. So I guess it's time for me to unveil it. Let's unveil it and let's get this show started. I gotta unveil this new intro. Let's run it back. Well, that's the new intro. Welcome to Amsterdam Talk. I'll be your host as always, broad, as we got Slippery Wet and When Wet Tia in the building. And today we want to talk about STDs and STIs. Before I get started, you always know I like to talk about something that happened this week as usual. Well, I don't think anything happened this week that was crazy to me this week, but my grandbaby left. That was, the host of the show last week, but he's gone home, so it's just me. So we're gonna get right into it. How you doing today, Tia?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. 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 But we want to make sure we get into it to let our people know, that STIs is a sexually transmitted infection versus a sexually transmitted disease. So give us a little background about that, Tia, before we get started.
Okay, so a lot of people use them interchangeably, and it's okay to use them interchangeably, but there is some difference. One, the biggest reason that we switch from STD to STI is stigma. So there's a lot of shame and stigma surrounded around contracting an infection, whether that's something like HIV or something like chlamydia. So we want to kind of alleviate a lot of the stigma so that people feel comfortable, one, disclosing their statuses to their partner, seeking treatment, and seeking prevention. So that's one of the biggest reasons we use STI. And then two, there is a difference between an infection and a disease. So most sexually transmitted infections, well, all of them start off as infections, and with the exception of HIV, or with the exception of AIDS, they turn into diseases. So none of them are originally like a disease. So basically, what the difference is between an infection and diseases is how you treat it. So antibiotics versus like antivirals. So that's one of the major differences. But yeah, when you're saying an STDs, everyone knows what you mean. It's the same ones. You've got syphilis, you've got chlamydia, human papillomavirus, which is HPV. You got HSV, type 1 and type 2, which is herpes simplex virus. You have HIV, trichomoniasis, pubic lice, scabies, a lot. There are a lot. Crabs. You've got a lot out there.
Okay, but when you look at it though, as far as like STIs, like the pop. Well, I ain't gonna say popular because nobody wants it, but the most common is basically chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. They are the bacterial STIs, and you have a parasitic STI, as in trichomonas, or however you pronounced it. As my Baltimore accent is only gonna let me say trichomonas, you know. but which are all curable when existing, you know, based on what you said, based on a single dose of regimen of antibiotics. So what I was privy to understand is, you know, when we all go to the hospital and we go get tested for these diseases, that one thing that you have to ask for, you have to ask for a herpes test.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be no one asks for that. So like, why is that, you know, on the outskirts as normal testing as everything else?
So when you go and you ask to be tested, normally what you're getting tested for is chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. Those are the big three. And then sometimes, depending on where you go, they might include HIV, depending on your area. If there are large outbreaks of HIV in that particular area, then they might test for that more. Or if you go to certain clinics test for HIV more. But you do have to ask for herpes simplex virus because they're one, in the medical community, they don't think that a lot of people are exposed to herpes, which they, you know, test costs money. So to save money, they don't test for that unless you personally request it. So you say like, I think that I may be exposed to, and then they'll test for it. Or you say, I want to get tested for the big three and herpes. But also herpes is more common than what most people think. Your YouTube chat's down. Herpes is more common than what most people think. A lot of people have herpes, either type 1 or type 2. And that is a medical trend. It's a very problematic way that we view diseases, and that's why the testing is the way it is. So, a lot of people talk about cold sores and like, oh yeah, like I've had cold sores when I was a kid, or I had them, like, but that's no big a deal. But I mean, that's herpes, you know?
Right.
And so we are very comfortable talking about one without talking about like genital herpes. But they can be spread. So if you have an outbreak, like an oral outbreak, and you know, have sex with someone or have oral sex with someone's genitals, you can pass on herpes that way as well. And sometimes you have asymptomatic shedding, which means like normally people are like, if you're not having an outbreak, you can't pass herpes. But there is asymptomatic shedding, which means that you may not know that you have an outbreak and you are passing herpes. But yeah, it's just something that we have to tell people to ask their doctors for. It's more common than you would think. I think a lot of people would be surprised, like chickenpox and shingles actually
Right.
is herpes as well. So if you had that when you were younger, you might still, you know, obviously you haven't had anything later in life, so you're not at risk of exposing other people, but those are all herpes simplex virus.
So that's the big difference between simplex 1 and simplex 2, asymptomatic and actually having it.
No, so herpes 1 and HSV 2 is the biggest difference is where it's located. So HSV 1 is typically oral, whereas like, and that's like the cold sores on your lips, whereas HSV 2 it's typically genital. Now there's little nuances here and there, but that's the differences that everyone recognizes.
Okay, so you know, in the African American community, I forgot what school you said you. I mean, I remember you said you went in the Army or something like that last time we talked. But you know, in the Army, like, I know for a fact. Did you go to a HBCU? Before I even say this out my mouth.
No, I went to UT Knoxville.
Okay, UT Knoxville. Okay, so this is a conversation. And me going to Maryland Eastern Shore, you versus going to UT Knoxville, Tennessee Knoxville. So what would you say was the most what was the outbreak? Because every college has an outbreak some type of somewhere. So what was the outbreak at UT Knoxville?
Chlamydia times 2. So UT had chlamydia, and then in the Air Force at my base, we had chlamydia. So
Okay.
I went two
Now,
places that had chlamydia outbreaks.
Now, you know, in my time at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, before I got there, there was like an HIV outbreak. There was an HIV outbreak, and then when I got there, there was a gonorrhea outbreak as well. So, why would you say, being in like as African American people, minus we'll take the HIV out. We'll take the HIV out because that's another situation. But as those three, as there's those two as a STI, the chlamydia outbreak and the gonorrhea outbreak, why is like that so subjective in the African American community?
So the reason why African Americans and brown people in general contract STDs sometimes at higher rates than our white counterparts is a very layered reason. So it's lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to family planning tools, whether that's condoms, whether that's preventative care like PrEP and PEP, which are preventative care for HIV, whether that's, living in communities that already have higher spreads because of some of the things that I mentioned before. So there are communities that have outbreaks, right? So let's say your college had an outbreak of gonorrhea. Well, you're sleeping, most people sleep intraracially, which means you're probably sleeping with other people, other Black and brown people. If you're brown, you're probably sleeping with brown people. If you're Black, you're probably sleeping with Black people. So that increases your risk of whatever the STI is. So if in your community there's already a risk of gonorrhea, and then every time you sleep with another Black person in that community who's already predisposed to certain medical risk, that just increases your risk even more. And especially in communities like I'm here in the South, and we don't have a lot of sex education. So that means we're probably not using condoms as often, or we're probably not getting STI checks as frequently, because the surest way not to pass an STI is to know that you have one and, take the correct treatment measures. So if you only get tested once a year, but within a 12-month time span, you have 8 different partners, well, you could have contracted something and been asymptomatic, and you're waiting until the next January, to take a test. But that whole time you're spreading, and then your partners are spreading, and then their partners are spreading, which is why when you get tested, contact tracing is so important for you to be like, hey, what's up? It's your girl. Gotta tell you something sensitive. I tested positive for chlamydia. You might want to go get tested. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that with your partners, there are services. Normally the CDC, because the CDC always gets alerted, they'll ask you, do you want them to reach out to your partners? Or if you go to somewhere like Planned Parenthood, they'll ask you if you want them to reach out. There are text services so you don't have to do it. I mean, they're not going to say your name, but if you're the only person they slept with, then they can put 2 and 2 together. So, but you bought yourself some time, But yeah, it's a lot of factors that go into why our communities have higher rates. It's the same reason why we have higher rates for a lot of other things. It's a lot of medical racism, a lot of economic inequality that goes into why there's we're not more genetically predisposed to contracting illnesses. It's just all these environmental factors that play a part.
Right, which is true. But my thing is, like, I understand that parent Parenthood and the CDC will definitely reach out to your partners, but why would you think someone be nervous to tell their partner, like, hey, listen, I had this, I went to the clinic and I was diagnosed with this, and I think, you should go to the clinic as well? Why do you think most people don't reach out and be like, well, this is what's going on?
Because of the shame. So you got to think, when a lot of people first had sex education, and for a lot of people across the country, it was very limited. And what was probably covered was STIs, and it was probably made it seem to be this disgusting, horrible, awful thing that happened to people who didn't listen and went against God and had premarital sex in some way. So like, if that's your beginnings of hearing about STIs, and we often use words like, instead of saying, did you test negative or positive, we say, are you clean? Which inherently means that someone who tests positive is dirty, and all of these things, we kind of build in shame into the system. And then we just don't talk about STIs enough. So like, how often is someone publicly being like, yeah, guys, got chlamydia, finna go to the clinic, get my little pills or whatever. Like, it's not like being like, oh my God, I have the flu. Like, everyone talks about being sick and getting over the flu. Obviously, you're not going to your friend's house with the flu, but it's not something to be like, let me shun them and stay away. And this reflects negatively on your character. And then we have people who lash out, who can get very angry or aggressive or even violent. If someone tells them something negative, like if you go to Planned Parenthood, they'll ask you, do you feel safe if you were to share with your partner that you were tested positive for an STI? And even the need for that question to be asked kind of implies that there are some problems there, that people are disclosing, hey, this is what happens, and then they're getting backlash. On top of that, we have the criminalization of STIs. So I know a lot of people think like, oh, if you have HIV and you give me HIV knowingly, like you should go to jail. That's a thing. I support it. And like, obviously when I was younger, I was definitely on that bandwagon. But what studies have shown is that that is actually doing more harm than good. People are disclosing even more than they would before, because now they're facing legal issues, they're facing fines, they're facing being sued, jail time, loss of jobs, sex offender registries. It's all kinds of craziness. And so that's actually causing people to withhold their STIs or not get tested. Because if you know something's wrong with you, but you never get the test to prove that there's something wrong with you, you could keep going on and then kind of feigning ignorance. And that's why I think it's such a big deal on why we don't disclose our STI statuses, because we're just waiting on our partner to maybe not. And a lot of people don't know. There's a lot of ignorance. Like if I say, hey, I've got gonorrhea, and the only thing that flashes in your mind are like genital warts and like sores and all this other stuff, like maybe that's not what's going on with me, but that's what you see. And now you're like, oh, retracting away from me. And that doesn't feel good. We haven't taught people how to handle these conversations, how to respond if someone does tell them a thing, how to move past it. So like maybe this is a friend and y'all were just kind of hooking up and one got chlamydia and gave it to the other. Now what? You both did your medicine, you're good to go, but like now there's this awkward thing in the friendship, and maybe you never recover from that because you never know like how to handle that.
Well, I mean, yeah, that is definitely awkward to, to figure it out. But the thing is, like you said, when people know and if they willingly don't share, and then there's jail time facing. So I know I know for sure because I watched the Barbara Walters special with Charlie Sheen a couple years ago.
Yes.
Where it was like, a non-disclosure, basically, like I told these women this is what's up. So are there people, who have these life-threatening disease or lifelong disease such as herpes and AIDS or HIV? Are people still willing to go through with the do if they know?
Yes, there are plenty of people who still lead happy and healthy sex lives with HSV, with HIV. And I think the reason because is one, we're becoming more educated. So it's not an automatic no-no zone anymore for people. And then two, there are treatments and prevention plans for the partners. So for HIV, you can get your antibody count so low that it's not even detectable anymore. Like if I tested someone who had HIV, I wouldn't even know it. That does not mean that they don't have HIV. They have not been cured. It's just undetectable. And so if they're taking their proper medication daily, and they're making sure that their partners are taking their medication, and that prevents the spread and the transmission of HIV. So when you know that you have a pretty surefire way of having sex with someone and not contracting an illness, you're more likely to be like, oh, okay, cool. Like love is still there as long as we're both doing our part, then we're good. And even if you do slip up, it's kind of like a plan B of HIV. There's a pill you can take within 72 hours of exposure, and that will severely decrease your risk of contraction. Same with HSV. So there are treatments that people can take to keep their outbreaks low. There are things that they can take to fight their symptoms, and so their partners are safe. So there are communities that are specifically for people with HIV, dating people with HIV, and then there are communities of people who do not have HIV, who date HIV and herpes and vice versa.
Well, you never know. I never come into these conversations, these Amsterdam talks, without not doing my research. So I went early and I had to look at the CDC stats, and basically it says, 23.8%. I'm gonna round it up. 24% of women and 34% of men aged 15 or 44 use a condom and intercourse. So basically, for women, that's 75%, and men, that's 65%. So why is, if you know that you're not with this person, this is a one night stand or just something that we're just doing at this time, why the condom use is so low?
So for some people, it's access to condoms. There are some people who are under the age of 18, like when you're starting at 15, maybe you don't have your own funds to go buy condoms. You don't know where to get free condoms. Not all schools provide condoms. And maybe you could afford it, but you're afraid of like your parents or someone finding them, so you just don't keep them. There's also stigma on women to carry their own condoms sometimes. People see women with condoms, they're like, oh, like you were here to do whatever, even though it's the safest thing, like, oh, she must be a hoe if she carries her own condoms or da 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 da. Like, I have a box of condoms. It's in a box that my mom gave me. It says Mother's Recipe for Love, and that's where I keep my condoms because I just felt like that was fitting, and it just sits beside my bed. And if I ever need it, I just reach in there, take one out. But yeah, there's a stigma there for women wearing or providing condoms. There's a pleasure aspect. We see people talk all the time about how sex without condoms feels so much better than sex with condoms. And then there's an educational aspect in the sense that we don't give people all of their options and everything that can happen. And when we do, we kind of scare them. And every time you have sex, you don't get pregnant, right? So every time you have sex and you don't get pregnant or you don't catch an STI, it takes away the threat they gave you when you were 13 more and more because you're beating the odds, right? But it's just, if you don't know all the facts, then you can't make the most informed decisions. So the reason that sex ed is so big is because we want to tell people like, hey, all these things are out there, and it's not just STIs, it's not just pregnancies. There's emotional things for some people. There's trauma for some people. Like, and if you don't know the dynamics of what you're going into, you might not make the best decision because you were going on a very limited knowledge. So it's just, I bet if you ask all of your friends how often they use a condom, they wouldn't say often. And even if it's not a one night stand, there are a lot of people who are married and find out they have chlamydia, from just going into their gynecologist appointment and they were asymptomatic and their gynecologist was like, hey, something's down here. Like, what's going on? There are people who are in long-term relationships who get cheated on and find out, there are people who are non-monogamous who have multiple partners, and maybe everyone isn't doing their due diligence. Or even if you're with someone, a friend that you've been having sex with for years now, on and off, whenever they come in town, y'all hook up. And now maybe you're feeling comfortable not to use condoms anymore because you're like, if they get pregnant, like, we'll just get an abortion, or like, we'll take a plan B or something like that. And you forget the possibility of STIs. So there's a lot of reasons why people don't use condoms.
I mean, well, to test to that, I'm always honest with my viewers, and I have definitely gave up around about Soraka about 2003. A plan B came into the situation. I had to give I had to give a plan B out, but
it's not cheap.
that was, well, her insurance paid for it. She had to talk to her dad about that, but that's another day and another story to tell. But so, and other things about that, as far as like, just men in general, it also says that uncircumcised men are at higher risk of acquiring STDs, and then men that are circumcised, as far as like chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, and things, but they are lower in acquiring genital herpes and genital warts. So how does that, go? We have an uncircumcised and a circumcised guy, but circumcised is more they are more higher to catch genital warts and genital herpes than a guy that's uncircumcised. How does that work out?
So the first time I ever heard of this was when I was studying like the UN's policies to cut STIs overall by 2030. That's their aim. And they were saying how giving out condoms in developing countries, and I use developing in quotes because I hate that term, but in developing countries, cut down the spread of HIV. And so the reason that it cut down the spread is obviously because, they're using condoms. But they went deeper into the study and they found, like you were saying, that uncircumcised penises are more at risk. And one of the reasons is the same as kind of with vaginas and vulvas, is that there are more places for bacteria to hide and store. When you're circumcised, there's not as many damp, dark places to get in as there is with an uncircumcised penis, as well as the fact that uncircumcised penises are also, so back up. There are a lot of acts that make you more and less likely to contract an STI. Like anal sex is more likely to risk STI contraction than vaginal sex. Being the person who penetrates instead of the penetratee makes you less at risk to contract an STI. So even if, let's say, I have chlamydia and we have sex tomorrow, you would be less at risk than I would because I would be the penetratee and you would be the penetrator. So there are a lot of different things that like increase your risk and lower your risk, increase your risk and lower your risk. So you could get it and you could not. And I could test positive and you could test negative. And that's just because of all of these factors. Now, as far as genital warts go and why people with uncircumcised penises are less at risk for genital warts, I'm actually not sure. I don't want to sit here and lie to you and say that I know an answer that I don't. I wasn't aware that of the genital wart statistics, but one thing about condom usage that people should know is that it does not prevent everything. So a lot of condoms are about preventing fluids. And so that getting in fluids, mixing with other fluids, but there are some STIs that are just based on touch. So like genital warts is something that if you touch, it can be spread. It doesn't need semen or vaginal fluids or anything like that. It just needs your body to touch a place on their body that where there is an outbreak taking place. So that is another reason why, even though you might use condoms every single time, you're still not 100% protected. And you should still be getting STI screenings and you should still be having conversations about your partner's sexual health history. And that's not a question of what's your body count, because that doesn't determine anything, but it's more a question of when was your last STI screening? How often do you get STI screenings? Would you feel comfortable telling me if you did have a positive STI? Those are the kind of conversations we should be having instead of like, hey girl, what's your favorite shape? Triangle, cool. What's your body count? Like, that's not as helpful,
Right. I totally get you. But first and foremost, I just want to rectify what you just said. You said me being a penetrator and you being a penetratee. After the show 2 weeks ago, I don't stand a chance against y'all people. I don't stand a chance. So I just, if anybody didn't watch, the BDSM and kink show, you will understand why I'm saying I don't stand a chance at all. So, but back to what we're talking about tonight. So basically, as an STIs, like you said, just by touching, so just by getting a hand job or usually just by getting a hand job that you are able to contract HPV, genital warts, chlamydia, herpes simplex 1, or syphilis. So, just to make sure, are those correct, that just by a hand job?
No, so it's not for syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia. That's not contact to contact. That is purely for genital warts, pubic lice, scabies, herpes, and I think those are it. But there's a lot of STIs out there, and sometimes some parasites are lumped into the STI just because they are spread through sex as well, but that's not the only way they're spread. So it just depends. Sometimes there are varying definitions of which counts as STIs and which don't. But those for sure: genital warts, herpes, um, pubic lice, and crabs all pass through skin to skin contact. And that's just because genital lice and crabs are parasites and they can jump from body to body on their own. And then herpes is you just have to touch the source of an outbreak. You don't need blood or semen or vaginal fluids for that to spread.
Well, let's go to the black myth. To the black myth that always happens. I got gonorrhea, syphilis from sitting on the toilet. That seems to be one of the myths that that I've heard before. Like, yo, I got this. Yo, what? Huh? Is that possible?
No, no. So I know that has been something that's floated around, and I don't know if that floated around because someone was ashamed to say how they got it, or someone didn't want to seem like they were cheating or something of that regard. But that's not how that spread. A lot of these things take a lot more effort than you think to spread, which is why like full sexual activity is what takes. Like sex is not normally like a quick touch. It's not like, oh, we held hands and we're good. Like, so yeah, no, that's not how that works. Even with things like HIV, you can't transmit HIV through saliva. So like, it's not just like, oh, I put my mouth on their mouth and now I have HIV. Like, that's not how that works. You need blood, and you need a substantial amount of blood and fluids. And that's why people who have anal sex are at higher risk of contracting STIs, because the anus isn't self-lubricating. So it's more prone to tears and microabrasions. And when there's a tear, there's a place for bacteria to get inside, so whereas the vagina is self-lubricating. So when you're lubricating, there's less friction, there's less risk of tearing, even microabrasions, which are something, when I mention that, that's something that's small. You can't really see those cuts, but they are cuts. And when there are cuts, that's an open wound, and open wounds make easy targets for infections. And so you would need a lot. Like, you would have had to sit on a toilet with open genital wounds that had someone else's fluid sitting on the toilet as you put, like, it would take a lot for you to contract an STI from that.
Okay, so you say abrasions in the anal. So we'll take a jump over to the the alphabet people, because I really can't say that I'm like LGBTQ right now. So we'll take a jump over there. So in the penile system. Mm-hmm. So is this where, like, they say a lot of this happens over there where the spreading happens, and when they come home they spread, because this is what they do in the penile system. So is there any truth, or that's just a myth as well?
It depends. So realistically, men who have sex with other men are at higher risk of contracting HIV. Now, higher risk doesn't necessarily mean they have higher rates. Actually, heterosexual Black women are trending for the highest rates of HIV right now. And it's not just because of down low men. It's about medical racism and like how we treat and target Black communities and poor communities and things like that. But yeah, so yes, that can happen, especially in prisons where medical care may not be the greatest and people may not have access to that, especially in prisons where there is a large number of abuse and sexual assault. Because like I said, the anus gets cuts, and if you're facing a traumatic situation, you're definitely not in a situation where you're relaxed and you're allowing entry into a space, so that probably creating even more cuts. But that's just my assessment. That's not something that I have studied penile rates of STI contractions but yeah, prisons have higher rates of most infections, whether that's staph or gonorrhea. And it's just because how we do things, at least here in America and the prison system. Um, it's really shitty. So
Eh,
yeah, so
understand.
yeah, but when they come out, if they either don't know that they have HIV or don't care to know and they don't want to tell people, because then that might mean owning up to some very harsh realities. And maybe they don't have access to, mental health or treatment programs or something like that. A lot of people don't come out of prison with money. So you're not, if you don't have health insurance, you're not really going to the doctor. And HIV medications can be expensive, especially things that you have to take daily. That's a lot of pills. Even if it's just one every single day, that's 365 pills a year.
Right.
So it can be, that's a number of reasons I would recommend for everyone to be getting tested regularly, especially if you're in a situation like that where someone comes home. um, I would recommend testing, and not just because you don't trust your partner, but because it's the smartest thing to do for both of you. Maybe they didn't know that they had HIV and now they can get on a path of treatment. And maybe you don't want HIV and now you can get on a path of prevention.
Well, that's the thing. What I was going to go to about not knowing, because there is a deep. This is not even a myth in the Black community as far as African American male men. I go to the doctors regularly, and when I talk to my guys, my homeboys, they're like, "Yo, what the fuck you going to the doctors for?" Regularly. I mean, I want to make sure the tools are working right.
Yeah.
That there ain't nothing wrong. So why is it so much that? I mean, and I know we fear when we go, they're going to find something wrong. So why is the fear there? Is like finding something that's there and not wanting to know, or just not wanting to know, period, or just not wanting to go. So I'll rephrase my question. Why do African American men do not like to go to the doctors like they should?
Well, it's a lot of things. Obviously, there have been medical cases.
Those with health insurance. But
Yes.
I understand where you're going to go at. But go explain your story. I see Laurel's question. I got you.
There have been cases of medical malpractice, where people don't trust doctors. There are cases where sometimes men feel impervious to disease. They feel like it's not going to happen to them, or they're strong. They go to the gym, they eat right, and well, the viruses don't really care about those kinds of
Right.
things. But because of that, because of their the way that they perceive masculinity, they may think that that is shielding them from a lot of health issues. Also, why they don't want to go. Some people might have fears of doctors' offices. I know people used to joke when I was younger about like getting prostate exams, and like, don't a lot of Black men don't want nobody playing with their booty holes.
Hey, I'm gonna
Like,
cut you off right there because I didn't have one already. That shit it ain't for the weak at heart.
yeah.
But I understood that this has to be done. And and I stated in the group, I'm gonna let you finish in a second, but I stated in this group when Chadwick Boseman passed away at the age of 4, basically at 40. I mean at 40. So it's like he lived with stage 3, prostate cancer for so long, and he did so many incredible things for us. 21 Bridges, 42, Black Panther. He did so much for himself and for his family, working, being sick at this. So, and once that dropped, I say, fellas, you gotta be able to go get this. It's not a great feeling because you're gonna get the guy with the biggest goddamn hands in the world. And I've dealt with this, and I wish I could tell y'all my experience, but I can't because YouTube might shut us down. How I cuss the damn doctor out. But you can continue.
Um, to your point, there are different prostate exams now. They don't all have to be rectal. Not all doctors have started doing them yet, but you can request and see if your doctor wants to, and that
I want the one
way.
with the little hands, with the little hands.
Well, they don't have to. They don't have to go up there at all. There's new technology out that they can do a prostate exam in a way that's non-invasive. But like I said, not all doctors are doing it yet. You might need to ask your practitioner, especially if they're like been practicing for years and years and years and years. They might not want to do the new trend yet. Or you can go to another doctor. So that's for people who may be afraid of that. That's why they don't go. You can go somewhere where they don't have to stick a finger up your booty hole. That's for you. But yeah, I think that's also a conversation that men need to be having with other men. Sometimes it just hits different when people within your community who have some of the same fears or some of the same challenges talk to you about it. Like, it's one thing for me to be like, hey, no, you need to go to the doctor because it's great. And like every time anything kind of squeaks or feels away on my body, look, oh my God, I have to go get seen. That might not be a lifestyle that they can relate to. You know, they're like, well, I'm not doing that. Like, but is there a medium somewhere that, you know, that's for us? And so I think those conversations need to be had. And when kids get hurt, I think it has to start young. When little boys are going through whatever, like, take them to the doctor. If you going to the doctor often as a child, you'll probably keep going to the doctor, financial things willing, you know, that you'll probably keep going. It's a trend. You have to kind of start early. Like, if your daughter says, oh, something hurts, and you rush her to the doctor, but your son goes, oh, something hurts, and you're like, man up, you rub some dirt on it, you'll be all right. That kind of sets a precedent, you know, for the way that they live their life later on.
But that's how we are. I mean, I can remember my dad, me falling and scraping myself up. Get up, you all right?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand I'm a boy, but my sister fell and he picked her up and said, oh, baby. I'm like, what the hell is going on?
Yes.
So, but that's the double standard of it. But, you know, I want to answer we have a fan right here that wants a question. So they want to talk about, we already reached on this, but they want you to go deep into it about dating and the stigma with disclosure.
Okay. So yeah, a lot of people date. There are Instagram pages that are talking about living their lives out loud, dating. You can still have casual sex. I know that sounds crazy, right? Like, you have such a life altering, but honestly, they're not as life altering anymore. You can still do all the things, but you should. I am a huge advocate of disclosing early and often. But the way in which you disclose is completely up to you. So if you feel more comfortable disclosing via text message, if you feel more disclosure, just like putting it in your Tinder bio, like, what up, it's your girl Tia Freeman, and I have syphilis, or I have whatever, you know, that's your prerogative. And that way people know off rip, like, when I swipe this person, I swipe knowing that she had syphilis, you know, like, or however you feel comfortable, like sitting them down maybe at a dinner or something and telling them. But it's not truly, it is not as bad as what it used to be. I know people who, like, one of my really dear friends, she has herpes and she still dates. She's honest with people. She's just like, hey, like, I remember when she first told me, and she was like kind of super freaking out about it. But obviously with what I do, I seemed like a safe bet to tell.
You think she would come on? You think she would come on here
to
talk about it?
Probably
okay,
not.
All right. Okay. All right.
Probably not.
All right.
But yeah, there are plenty of people. I mean, I could get you guys in contact with who would be open, because they talk about it openly on their social media platforms. And they're Black, of course. One's British, so I don't know if they have HBCUs over there. But
it's not about HBCUs and none of that. When you come on Amsterdam Talk, it's basically you telling your story.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you went to PWI, HBCUs, community college, high school. It doesn't matter. You in my house. You're welcome.
Okay. But yeah, I can link you guys. One thing that's important is to make sure that when you are disclosing and you're being disclosed to, is that those two people have very different roles and responsibilities. So the person who is disclosing, even though that's a very vulnerable part in their lives, they have to also understand that the person they're disclosing to has feelings and emotions as well. And you also have to be okay with someone deciding that they do not want to take things further, or that they do not want to engage in sexual activity. And I know that's not fun. I know that's not hard, but that is the reality of the matter, is that not everyone is going to want to continue. But as long as you're open and honest, you don't have any shame in you shouldn't have any shame in how that played out. Like, you put all your cards on the table, and that's just not the card game that they wanted to play. There will be other people who would love to play that game with you, you know? But as people who are being disclosed to, you have to understand that yes, you have a right and there's validity, and you feeling maybe afraid, or you feeling maybe even as far as disgusted, but you have to realize that you're also talking to another human being. And so if someone tells you a thing and your first reaction is disgust, which we can work on that. We can work on that.
Right.
Remember that you're still talking to a person. They're still
Right.
a person with real feelings. So try to be sensitive to the fact that they're sharing something very personal and very potentially hurtful to them. So if someone says, hey, like I have HIV, and you have questions, it's okay to ask questions. They should be prepared for questions. The same questions they had when their doctor probably diagnosed them are probably going to be questions that you have, you know? So they should have some answers for that. And if they can't provide you answers, ask them if they're willing to go more into this. And honestly, if someone is hiding things from you, then that's not a person you want to be with. If they're like, I have HIV, but you can't ask me anything about it, or like, if I'm taking my medication, if I'm doing this, like, because that's not safe on you, and that's irresponsible on their part, you know, like. So I just found out I have chlamydia. I'm not saying we were gonna have sex today, but I'm on day 6 of the 10 to 14 days that I have, you know, like, but so that means for the next week, we won't be having sex, you know, like, is that something you're okay with? Do you want to move forward at all? Do you not want to move forward? And some people may not even share it. Some people might just not have sex with you for the time that they're on their medicine. And then moving forward, be like, okay, well, you're not at risk anymore. So now we can have all the sex that we want, you know?
Right.
And that's why you need to have conversations about, and it's okay to ask someone if they've had an STI. But like I said, be respectful of the fact that that is that person's real life, their real situation. And there are prompts online that'll give you like ways to open up these conversations, ways to like text and disclose, way to talk. There's scripts that they give out for people who may be struggling with telling someone. So you can just Google that. It's a pretty easy find. But some things they're just like, hey, like I wanted to reach out and talk to you. It's come to my attention that this happened. I know you might have some questions, but you should first reach out to your doctor so that you can schedule an appointment to get screened. And then we can go from there. Boom.
Got you. So another person asked, what's been the success rate with disclosure?
I'm not exactly sure on the question. Are you asking with disclosure how many people continue
How
to
many
have
people
sex or
just kept,
continue to
they just said, I'm
relationship?
going forward. I'm going forward. I'm going forward. I don't care. I'm going forward.
That's not something I can answer because that's not something that's been studied. There aren't a lot of reliable, you know, if someone says, I have herpes and I still date all the time, I mean, that's one person's dating experience where someone else could not be experiencing that. From what I've seen, it's pretty hit or miss. A lot of people who have been open about their positive STI statuses, especially ones that are lifelong, have said that they got, you know, more of a positive reaction than what they originally expected. There are some people who are like, it hasn't been so great. But that could also be in the way that you're conveying a message. If you don't have answers for a lot of things, then someone probably won't want to do the things. And times have changed. So we used to think, you know, when the AIDS epidemic hit really bad in the 80s, it was a death sentence and everyone was afraid, and people were talking about how this was a punishment from God on the gays, you know, and all of these things. And now that's not how a lot of people look at it. A lot of people are more educated on what HIV is. A lot of people understand the risk. A lot of people understand the treatments. Like, I have never been exposed to HIV, but I know what PrEP and PEP is. And PrEP is for people, you know, who are having a partner who, you know, has HIV and they want to make sure they don't contract it. And then there's the other one, PEP, that's like, oh, hey, I just want to make sure that I don't get it. I did some maybe risky behavior, whether that's considered a male person who had sex with another male identifying person, or I had sex for money, or I was attacked and I don't know if my attacker has HIV and you want to take a preventative medication, kind of like the plan B of HIV, and just to make sure that you don't get it. Just to make sure you weren't exposed. So I can't answer that question for you, and I'm super sorry because I think it varies from person to person and the location you're in. I would say locations with less sex education where they might not know that it's no longer a death sentence. They might not be as open to it, areas where communities may be higher, you might find more people know more about it or more people have it, and so they're willing to date with it. So it's hit or miss.
I understand it. And while you were speaking of that, I actually had to pull up the facts right now. We have 37 states that will criminalize you for HIV. And then we have 11 states that will not. So the 11 states, that will not criminalize you are Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Wyoming, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. And if I got these things, my glasses show, and it looks like there's Delaware and then there's DC that will not criminalize you for these acts, but there's 37 states that will, and there's a sentence enhancement stature in Colorado.
Yeah, so criminalization goes from knowingly exposing someone to HIV all the way to spitting on someone. Like if you have HIV and you spit on someone else, you could be criminalized for that, even though we know that HIV is not transmitted through saliva. And which shows you that even our policymakers aren't aware of the realities of some of the things that they're dealing with. Like if I spit on you and I have COVID, you're probably getting COVID, right? If I spit on you and have HIV, you're just gonna wipe it. You're gonna be mad. You might punch me in my face, like, which I deserve, but you're not getting HIV from that. And so, yeah, there are a lot of states that criminalize STI contraction, primarily HIV. And I think it's just because of the 80s and the scare that it had. And because there were people who had wives, and were participating in, queer sex and bringing it back and not telling, because you can't tell if you're married to a woman and not wanting her to know that you also sleep with men, or there are just people who are ashamed of the fact that maybe they might be seen as queer. Like, I know if anyone's seen Straight Outta Compton, when Eazy-E was like, but I ain't gay, like when they told him this, that he was diagnosed. Well, yeah, heterosexual people get HIV just like everybody else can get HIV.
Right. I remember that saying.
Yeah, and so maybe that's the reason people aren't disclosing. But yeah, like I said, there are a lot of laws on the books that criminalize it, and you can get serious sentences. You can get charged with attempted murder, which I think carries a minimum of 20 years. Like, depending on the states, it can get really, really real, really quick.
Well, I have your stats right here for you. Some of the states carry, there is just a bar graph. So a minimum that you said 20 years, a lot of the states carry 1 to 5 years. Majority of the states carry 6 to 10, 11 to 20, and the letter is over 20, but a lot of the less carry under 1 year.
Okay.
So
yeah,
that's just that. But California, Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, and North Carolina has definitely modernized their HIV criminalization law since 2014.
Yeah. So it's not that I don't think that there needs to be some sort of repercussion, because that's a serious thing, that is not, you're playing with someone's life. And even though more often than not, HIV is no longer converting to AIDS here in the United States. It's staying in HIV. You can live a happy and healthy life. Sometimes you live even longer than people who don't have HIV, because you're regularly going to the doctor because you have this thing. But it is serious in the fact that someone has to have these conversations now. Like, you have to disclose this thing to people now. Like, you have to take medication now. You have to stay up on certain things now. You have to be able to afford your medication at all times now, you know, like it's, I don't think that's something that should be taken lightly. But at the same time, like I said, because of the way criminalization backfired in disclosures, I can't support that either, because at the end of the day, I want people to disclose and I want people to get screened and get tested and, you know, take preventative measures and do their treatments. Yeah.
But before we go, because we gotta take you over to Clubhouse. We gotta take you over to Clubhouse. It's normal how we do it on the Amsterdam Talk. You've been here before. So my question is this. So when you first start dating a person, I mean, man, woman, whatever you choose to date, why is there resistance when a person says, hey, listen, before we get down to do what we need to do, we should go get tested together? Why is there like faulty resistance? Why is the resistance there?
One, it could be you seen as a reflection on who you are. So if we're out to dinner and you're like, oh great, like this is so good, you want to take this back to my house? And I'm like, yeah. And then we're driving and you go, so we're gonna go back to the house, we're gonna kick it. We're not having sex until we both get STI screenings. Like, someone could be like, whoa, you think I'm dirty? Like, because like I said, they have these stigmas about them. And you're not just saying something like, oh, you think I have a cold or you think I have allergies. You're accusing me of having an STI, which is the worst thing a person could accuse another person of, you know? And so that might make someone automatically defensive and thinking like, damn, like I just met you and all of a sudden you think that I have this. Do you not think I would tell you? You think I'm untrustworthy that I wouldn't disclose that to you? And then also there's a waiting period and not everybody wants to wait. So you have to schedule an appointment and hope your doctor or the clinic can get you in. So say today's Friday, well, it's the weekend, they can't see you till next week, and now it's Wednesday. And then once you take it, there's a couple days before you hear back. You're like, oh my God, I gotta wait 2 weeks before I can have sex. Like, and so some people don't want to wait. Some people just want to go ahead and they're like, when's your last test? You're like 6 months ago. You're like, so you think you're good? You're like, yeah, I'm good. But the truth of the matter is sometimes symptoms take a long time to show up. Sometimes you get tested before the symptoms presented. So if today is Friday and I have sex and I go get tested tomorrow on Saturday, that test may not read that I have an infection because the infection hasn't spread enough for it to be detectable. So then I'm moving forward thinking I'm all good. Like I got tested, when in reality, you should wait about 5 days from whenever you had sex to when you get tested. And in reality, you should be getting tested in between each and every partner, which is not always what happens. If you have sex on Friday, then you have sex on Saturday, there's 2 partners and you ain't been to the doctor till Tuesday. Well, but we try to do the best we can. So whether that's once a year for some people, because it's all their insurance covers, or whether that's quarterly, because you're like, I have sex more than yearly. So it's quarterly. And even if you're in a long-term committed relationship, you should still be getting tested. I know that can seem like I don't trust my partner and and you can trust your partners to the ends of the world. I don't care, but you still get tested at least once a year. Because like I said, some things can show up late. So maybe they didn't have it or it didn't present when you first started dating and now it's presenting, or somebody stepped down to the lines and now you know what's best for yourself, because STIs left untreated can cause other issues, cervical cancer, infertility, harm, death, autoimmune disorders. So I just think it's best, that these things happen, but people don't want to say. It's a hard conversation to have with someone. Like, a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about STIs and sex in general to just come out their mouth on the first time they meet someone and be like, so what that screening looking like?
So on that, so I mean, before I let you go, I know I just said it before I let you go, I know we got to get over there because Abe is like hitting me right now, like we got to go over the Clubhouse. But what is the percentages like if a pregnancy happens, there's a disability for a child to happen? I mean, a disability for a child for these STIs and STDs.
It's actually really low. It's extremely low. Now, granted, it still happens, and that's because of access to treatments. So the rates of mothers with HIV spreading it to children, I don't have the exact statistics, but it has astronomically gone down. And that's just because there's a lot of medications that we give to mothers who do have HIV, chlamydia and gonorrhea, herpes, all of those things can be passed through giving birth. The thing is, we also have medications for those. So let's say you have chlamydia, you take your medications, and then your chlamydia is gone. Well, your baby's not going to get chlamydia.
Right.
But yeah, we have, if you do what you need to do, the risk is so low. But that means you have to do what you need to do. And that means remembering your medication. That means picking it up, getting your refills, having access to the funds to do it, scheduling doctor's appointments. But it's not that bad.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tia Slippery When Wet from IG, for coming over to talk about STDs and STIs. I know I got to bring you back one more time for the trifecta. I know it's something else that you're good with. I know it's something else you want to come back for. How about this? You email Ava, you hit Ava or hit myself,
Okay.
and you give me a topic that you want to bring your friends on about, so we can, go from here. Because I got to bring you on for the trifecta because you're so knowledgeable about a lot of things. Okay. But if there's anybody out here that's watching and they want something specifically to be talked about on Amsterdam Talk, shit, I'm fucking my own damn show name up. Amsterdam Talk, please hit me or hit Ava, and we can make it happen. If you might be shy to come on camera, but I'm pretty sure we can find somebody to talk about it. If there's something that's going on in your life that you need to know, we can do it. I see you out there, Mike. You said you get tested every 6 months. I see it. Tia said that's not good. You need to go between every partner.
You should go between partners, but 6 months is better than what a lot of people are doing. So big ups to you.
So if you got Clubhouse, meet us over at the HBCU SL Amsterdam Post Talk. I'll be there. Tia will be there answering your questions. Other than that, I'm out of here. I'll see you next week. I really don't know my topic next week, but I believe my topic next week is down low brothers. I believe it is. I think it is. Women that belt for down low brothers. I think it is. I'm not sure. I got to talk in the back to see what's going on, but I don't know what's next week right now. So there's nothing else coming this week for the HBCUS Lounge. I don't think so. I haven't checked my schedule, but you can always check on the page and see. Once again, give it up for Tia for coming back again and spreading her wealth of knowledge from the last time to this time. And you're going to get more knowledge over at Clubhouse. Myself, Ava, this is Amsterdam Talk. Hope y'all like the new intro. That's halfway finished. It's going to be finished by next week. I'll see you next week with women that date down low brothers. I believe that's the next episode. So I'll see you next week. Talk to you later.